Okay, guys. So today we're gonna continue working on the listening section, and we'll be practicing TOEFL lectures, which is what we did yesterday. Right? Remember that you have, well, depending on the number of tests that you get, you can have 3 or 4 of these, and each one contains 6 questions that you have to answer. Right? So let's see. You guys, so be ready to take notes, please. I'm gonna start by playing the first lecture we'll be doing. Okay, it says a lecture from a life science class. So it's probably gonna be something scientific related. So are you ready?
Yes, mother.
Okay.
Listen to part of a lecture from a life science. Listen to part of a lecture from a life sciences class. Raise your hand if you're right-handed. Yup, that looks typical. Most of us, about 90%, are right-handed. It's been that way throughout history. In nearly every culture, right has been associated with positive qualities, while the left has been associated with negative, or even evil ones. In Latin, left means sinister. In ancient Japan, men could reject or refuse to marry women who were left-handed. In modern China, teachers try to force left-handed students to learn to write with their right hands. And, as I'm sure all lefties know, everyday items like can openers, scissors, computer keyboards are designed for righties. In short, left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it? It might seem straightforward to you and I, but scientifically speaking, the basis of handedness is not well understood. Most scientists define right-handed or left-handed on the basis of a person's preferred writing hand. But some scientists claim it should be based on the hand that is faster and more accurate in performing manual activities like tightening a screw or tying a knot. Still others claim that ability doesn't matter. In other words, that handedness should denote only preference. Yes, question.
What about people who are who use both hands?
You mean ambidextrous. Actually, most scientists agree that genuine ambidexterity is rare, and several of them believe it even rates its own special category as a distinct type of handedness. The reason for this is that most people can perform several functions relatively equal with either hand, which causes another scientific fraction to argue that there are actually only 2 types of handedness, right and non-right. This group advocates measuring handedness on a continuum from 100% right-handed to 100% left-handed. On this scale, we'd say something like, I'm 60% right-handed, or I'm 82.5% right-handed. Though how we'd determine who's more right-handed than another would open up a whole new can of worms. Okay, yes.
How do people become right-handed or left-handed in the first place? Does it come from your genes?
Mostly, yes. Research shows that handedness is largely genetic. Interestingly, though, even when both parents are left-handed, the odds are no better than 50-50 that their children will be lefties. Some scientists believe there is a specific gene that determines right-handedness, but the trouble is that they can't pinpoint it. They think this gene also aids in development of speech and language comprehension. Many researchers believe that handedness is a result of something called brain lateralization, which is the concept that each hemisphere of the brain controls different bodily functions. Researchers have long been believed that a person's dominant hand is on the opposite side of the brain hemisphere that controls their language specialization, so that right-handed people use the left half of their brain for processing language. But brain lateralization is not well documented, and there is evidence that seems to contradict this concept. For instance, while it's true that more than 90% of right-handed people do process language in their left hemisphere, recent research shows that about 40% of left-handed people also process language primarily in the left side of their brain. Additionally, only 10% of lefties rely primarily on their right brain to process language. So, what can we make of this? Though genetics clearly play a vital role in determining handedness, environment also seems to be an important factor. A recent archaeological study compared a group of modern Canadians with 1,000-year-old skeletons from a British farming community. The Canadians showed right-handed dominance by a 9-to-1 ratio of larger right elbows than left ones. In the ancient skeletons, however, most right and left elbows were equal. Now, this doesn't prove that the British farmers were ambidextrous, but researchers say it does suggest that handedness can be subject to societal influence. So for many, the best hypothesis at this time is that handedness results from a complex interaction of nature and nurture.
Okay, so we had that lecture that was about, what was it about?
About right hand and left hand.
It was about handedness, either right-handed people or left-handed. Exactly. And what do they discuss about handedness? What information do we get?
Some characteristic related to the atmosphere of the brain. For example, language or some percent like
But yeah, it's true. We do get different characteristics of handedness. And in general, I think mostly they focus on explaining, well, a student raises the question of what causes handedness, so they start talking about that. But before that, they also kind of define what handedness is. They talked a little bit about like the history of it. So that's what we have. Now let's see. We have our first question here that says, what is the main topic of the lecture? Main idea type of question.
the last one.
Okay, G, the scientific basis of handedness. Does everybody agree? Yes?
Yes.
Great. So yes, totally, because although they do talk about the three previous ones, they do define handedness, they do talk about right-handed dominance, and they do discuss handedness genetics. The main topic in general encompasses everything, right? So scientific basis of handedness in general. Good. Now question 2 says, why does the professor mention Japan and China?
See?
Okay, see, as examples of handedness prejudice. Yes?
Yes, letter C.
Okay, great. Yes, that's true. I think I agree. Because it was mentioned in the beginning when they were talking about like how people didn't accept left-handed people in the past, right? It was like something that they wanted to correct as if it were some sort of illness. So it was a prejudice against left-handed people. Now, question 3 says, according to the professor, what is the problem with the concept of brain lateralization?
B.
Right? Part of the brain. Is it?
Letter A can be.
Okay, A is the opposite of B. Different parts of the brain control different body functions. Same part of the brain controls all bodily functions. I don't know, does that seem like a problem though? Brain lateralization was a concept that was trying to explain what defines handedness in a person, right? So the problem with brain lateralization has to be that for some reason it does not really explain too well why people are either left-handed or ambidextrous or right-handed, right? Because we're looking for a problem. Okay, so I need somebody else. Nicholas, what do you think? Are you there, Nicholas? Okay. Arid, what about you? Lorena? No? Okay, let's go for B, which was the first one that was said, but I'm not sure. I don't think that the same part of the brain controls all bodily functions, right? I think that like your left hand, I mean, the left part of the brain controls some functions and the right part controls other functions. So I think A is true, but I don't know if that is really the problem with this concept, right? A may be true, but I don't know if it's a problem. So we're gonna see when we check. Now, question 4, it says, why does the professor say this? Get it? I'm gonna play it again, right, with the context. I think it's around here.
Left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it? It might
Okay, so I'm gonna play it again.
are designed for righties. In short, left-handers have been made to feel left out. Get it?
So why does the professor say that? Get it?
The letter B.
Letter B can be true.
Yeah, right. He wants to direct students' attention to a pun. A pun is a game of, it's a play of words, right? It's when you play with the words to create a joke or to kind of, yeah, to make a joke. So in this case, he said, left-handed people have been made to feel left out, right? So he's playing with the word left, like with both meanings of the word left. Right and left, and also left out in the sense that they are like excluded. So he wants to direct the students' attention to this joke that he made. Now, question 5 says, in the lecture, the professor mentions problems scientists have in determining handedness. Indicate which of the following statements is true. Again, basically the question is, what is a problem that scientists have in determining handedness, right? That's the question. Indicate a problem that scientists have in determining handedness. What do you guys think?
Can be C or D, I think.
C or D. Okay. Anybody else? Like, I don't know about the data, if this is true, only 2% of all people are genuinely ambidextrous, but how will that be a problem for determining handedness, right? Also, how option D would be a problem? Because if it would be true, like if it actually was true that 90% of left-handers process language in the left side of their left brains, like left brains. So even if this was true, would that really be a problem? I think that would even favor determining what causes handedness, right? Because this would explain it if it was true. So I don't know. What do you think, Alexandra?
They mentioned D, but I don't know if it's like the problem. I hear about D, so I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna go for D and we'll see what happens. Then we'll check the transcript. Okay, let's check the transcript now because I don't know if we'll be able to do it later. So we were not sure about this one here, right? What's the problem with the concept of brain lateralization? So they talked about that. I think here, right? Okay, many researchers believe that handedness is a result of something called brain lateralization, which is the concept that each hemisphere of the brain controls different bodily functions. Researchers have long believed that a person's dominant hand is on the side opposite the brain hemisphere that controls their language specialization. So that right-handed people use the left hand of their brain for processing language. But brain lateralization is not well documented. And there is evidence that seems to contradict this concept. For instance, while it's true that more than 90% of right-handed people do process language in their left hemisphere, more than 90% of right-handed people do process language in their left hemisphere. Recent research shows that about 40% of left-handed people also process language primarily in the left side of the brain. Additionally, only 10% of lefties rely primarily on their right brain to process language. Right, so here I think we find that the information we got for the last question is not correct, right? Because it's not left-handed people that process language in their left hemisphere, but the opposite. Right-handed people, 90% of right-handed people process language in their left hemisphere. But that's the problem, right, with this concept. So the problem is not that the same part of the brain controls all bodily functions or the different parts of the brain control different body functions. This is basically what the concept is about. And this is not true, right? This is the opposite of what the concept is about. But the problem is that it does not seem to apply to determining handedness, right? That sounds to me more like a problem. Also, even if you don't know the answer, like especially if you don't know the answer or you're not too sure about it, you gotta make it make sense. Now, in this case, they're asking for a problem with a concept that tries to explain what determines handedness. right? So the only problems that I see in these four options are option C and option D. Both of them could be problems, right? Because we know that this is a theory. So we have to have, so for a theory to have a problem, it could be disproved by a certain archaeological study, or it could not seem to apply to determine what the theory wants to determine, right? So I would choose between options C and D just by trying to make it make sense, right? Options A and B are related to the concept itself, but not with the problem. And finally, question 5, we know that this is not true, right? Because it's 90% of right-handed people process language in their left side of the brain. So what is the problem that scientists have in determining handedness? I think this is related to things in general, right? Think about it from the same point of view as for the previous one. If we're looking for a problem, option B, for example, I think we could discard, right? Because it says most scientists define handedness by manual performance accuracy. It wouldn't be a problem if most scientists agreed on something, right? That would actually be a good thing. If most scientists agree on something, then that's not a bad thing. That's not a problem. This is not true, according to what we read. And also, I don't see how that would be a problem. So, what is a problem in determining handedness? I think the problem is here, right? They say the reason for this is that most people can perform, okay, which causes another scientific faction to argue that there are actually only two types of handedness, right and non-right. This group, so there's one group of advocates. This group advocates measuring handedness on a continuum from 100% right-handed to 100% left-handed, right? So the problem is that scientists don't agree on things. Some scientists claim something, other scientists claim something else, and there's not an agreement between them. So I think option A would be the problem, right? Some scientists claim that only handedness is right and non-right. So let's see, let's check our answers, and we'll see. The first one is great. This is about the scientific basis of handedness. Second one is good as well. Handedness prejudices. Third one is good. As I was telling you, the problem is that it does not really apply to determining handedness, right? As we read before. Now, question 4 is okay. And question 5 is actually this, right? Some scientists claim the only handedness is right and non-right. So I am actually really glad to see that most of you are doing fine with all types of questions, right? We have like the main idea here, and that's good. Purpose and function, you got it correct. This was also function and purpose, and you got it correct. So the ones that you are struggling with seem to be detailed questions, right? And these detailed questions are not even that detailed. They are asking about big ideas. So careful. Maybe your notes is what's failing, right? Because that's why you are missing the details. Because I'm pretty sure that you didn't need your notes for the questions that you got right. For the first one, you didn't need your notes. For the second one, probably not, right? You just remember when it was mentioned and what the professor was saying. For this one here, you didn't need your notes. So the only ones that actually require your notes is the ones that you didn't get correct, right? So careful with your notes. Practice note taking. Listening to different types of lectures. So is this one okay? Do you guys have any questions about the one we just did? Everything clear? Everything okay? Okay, guys, great. Now we'll listen to another lecture. So please be ready. This one may be a little bit more difficult. We're increasing the level because it's a bit more technical. It's about biology. So you may have a few new words, new vocabulary, but it helps to practice with this type of content. So listen carefully and make sure that you take notes.
Listen to part of a university lecture on animal behavior by a professor of biology. We're looking at animal behavior this week, and let's turn now, class, to one of its most dramatic manifestations, animal mimicry. Organisms that are good to eat or that are attacked for other reasons often develop devices, through evolution of course, techniques and devices to protect themselves from their attackers in order to survive and in order to reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation. And one of these techniques, one of these strategies, is to look like something else, to look like something that is not good to eat, or something that is otherwise of no interest to the predator. An organism that does this, that resembles something else, is called a mimic. And the thing that it has evolved to resemble is called the model, while the predator that it is trying to mislead is called the recipient, the one that receives the misleading image. Some mimics do this by adopting camouflage, which is a cryptic resemblance to something of no interest to its enemy. And by doing this, they become invisible. They are hidden. Many animals, insects, lizards, amphibians, mimic the abundant plant life in the habitat around them. I'm sure that you've seen green grasshoppers and brown moths that seem to be well hidden on grass stems and tree trunks when they're motionless. But the leaf-tailed gecko, a small lizard in Madagascar, is a master at this. It avoids its enemies by looking exactly like a cluster of old dead leaves. And there are various species of katydids, grasshopper-like insects that have managed to duplicate the appearance of leaves with startling accuracy. In all stages of growth, some species looking like fresh green leaves and others looking like old decaying leaves, complete with leaf veins, weathered edges, and mildew spots. These adaptations make these animals difficult or impossible for a predator to identify or even notice, and so these otherwise defenseless creatures are overlooked or passed by. Other organisms defend themselves directly with stings or bites, or with poisons or other noxious chemicals, and such organisms often assume bold, characteristic colors and markings, called warning coloration, that warns a predator, reminds it that this creature can inflict pain or discomfort, or that it tastes very bad. The bold orange and black pattern of the common monarch butterfly, or the black and yellow bands on a bumblebee are such warning colorations. And sometimes this warning coloration is so effective that another species, a species that doesn't have any of the protective devices of sting or poison or whatever, will adopt the same warning colors and pattern. This sort of mimicry is called Batesian mimicry. The name comes from the early zoologist H.W. Bates, who back in 1862 first suggested an explanation for the origins of mimicry based on Charles Darwin's new theory of natural selection. This was one of the earliest applications of Darwin's ideas to an unknown biological phenomenon. Now, viceroy butterflies taste good to many birds, but because they mimic the monarch butterfly's model's color pattern, because viceroy butterflies look like monarch butterflies, they are avoided, just like the monarch is. In the same way, many harmless fly species resemble the bumblebee model, and also in this way they avoid being eaten by the recipients, birds. So these are Bastian mimics. There are several conditions that must be fulfilled, though, for a Bastian mimic to be successful. The mimic must, of course, share the same general region and habitat as its model, but the mimic must also be less numerous than its model, which must be relatively abundant. That way, the odds are that the recipient predator will sample an unpalatable model first, which is very important for keeping the trick effective. A similar kind of mimicry is Mullerian mimicry, named after another early biologist. And in this sort of mimicry, both the model and the mimic are dangerous or taste bad. A very obvious example is the way that so many unrelated species of bees, wasps, and ants have assumed similar, bold, black and yellow, or black and orange banded patterns. By doing this, Mullerian mimics present a united image that predators soon learn to be weary of. There's also another aspect of mimicry that I'd like to mention too, and that's the mimicry used by predators. This is called aggressive mimicry, and it is used to conceal or misrepresent a predator until its prey comes near enough to capture. Many mantids, for example, are green or brown, so that they blend in with their plant surroundings. But some tropical mantids are fantastically shaped and colored, like the beautiful orchid mantis, which resembles a petal of one of those tropical flowers, and it hides motionless next to one of these orchids until an insect comes within its reach. There are also several green-colored vine and grass snakes of various families, which lie invisible among the tangled vines and branches of the jungle until they suddenly lash out to grab their prey. Actually, there are an endless number of ingenious mimics in the natural world, and I recommend that you all try a Google Images search tonight for some more interesting examples of this fascinating behavior.
Okay. So what was this lecture about?
About how the different species can protect them about the other animals or other insects can eat them, I think.
Okay, good. So how some species of animals can protect themselves from other animals, but not only protect themselves, right? Because at the end they also, because they talked about one specific type of behavior in animals, right? What was that? How do they protect themselves?
Camouflage.
With, yes, camouflage, or not necessarily. Camouflage was one type, but
um, adapt to the app all the
yeah, but I think that's one type as well. In general, they were talking about mimicry, right? They were talking about different types of mimicry. This was a classification type of lecture. You have different types. Remember what we said for classification? It's very common. You have different types of something, in this case, different types of mimicry, animal mimicry. One of them was camouflage, and then you have other ones as well. I think you have like Bayesian mimicry, camouflage, aggressive mimicry. There was one more. Does anybody remember? Bulgaria mimicry, right? So you have these 4 types, and each type consisted in something different. So the animal acting in a specific way, they described what the type consisted in, and then they gave examples of animals that do that, right? And how they use this technique or in order to either protect themselves, or in the last type, aggressive mimicry, I think it was the opposite, right? They use mimicry to catch their prey. So that's what we have, right? Is that okay? Did you guys see the structure? Let's see. Now let's start answering the question. Now our first question here says, why does the lecturer mention Charles Darwin?
The first one?
Okay, he was the creator of the evolutionary theory. That may be true, but is that really the reason why the lecturer mentioned Charles Darwin? Is that related to mimicry? How is it related to mimicry?
Or letter B can be because it can use to explain this theory.
Makes more sense, right? Because we know, remember what happens with function and purpose questions, right? You have to look at the main idea of a thing, of something, and then understand how the professor mentioning Charles Darwin contributes to that main idea. So this was about mimicry. So the fact that the professor mentioned Charles Darwin has to somehow be related to mimicry. So option B makes more sense than option A, because Darwin was the creator of the evolutionary theory, yes, but how's that related to animal mimicry, right? How's that related to this lecture? Yes, then do we agree that it's option B? Or does anybody have another option in mind? Option B, right? Because also just try to remember when the professor mentioned Charles Darwin. If you guys remember well, then I think he was mentioned towards the beginning of the lecture, right? So it couldn't be D, for example, because Bache and Mullerian mimicry were kind of in the middle of the lecture, but this was mentioned in the beginning, so it's not related. And I don't think he explained mimicry, right? But let's see. Now, question 2 says, what is the term used for an organism that is fooled by mimicry?
The mother?
The model? I don't know. How does mimicry work? What is mimicry? What was mimicry? Mimicry is when you have one animal, let's say animal A, and this animal is imitating, is copying something, right? So we have animal A, which is going to be copying or imitating or mimicking something, right? Something else. So maybe, I don't know, maybe this animal is going to be copying, it could be another animal in some cases, right? So it could be copying animal B, or it could be copying or like resembling part of its environment as well, right? And why do they do this? In most cases, they do it to fool another animal, right? They want to escape or they want to protect themselves from a different animal. So from this animal here, animal C. So animal C, let's say, is the predator. Okay? Animal A wants to protect itself from the predator, which is why it's gonna imitate or mimic something else, right? Either another animal or part of its environment. So the animal that, which of these three do you guys think it's the model? Is it A, B, or C?
B.
B, right? B, because it's the thing or it's the animal that the first animal that animal A is copying. So it's the model, right? It's animal A is imitating a model. It's imitating this thing here, animal B or part of its environment. This is the model. So we're looking for the organism that is fooled by mimicry, right? The one that is fooled, el que está siendo engañado, the one that is being fooled by mimicry. Is it animal A, B, or C, the one that is being fooled? Which one is the animal that is being fooled by the mimicry?
C.
Option C, exactly, because they are, this animal C is being fooled, right? Animal A is the one that is fooling animal C. Animal C is the one that is receiving the action, right? So what do you guys think? They are asking us, what is this animal C, called? Is it the recipient? We say that it's not the model, right? Because animal B is the model. Is it the recipient? Is it the device? Or is it the prey? The prey it's not the prey, right? Because we know that animal A is the prey in any case. So what is it called? What is the term used for this organism that is being fooled by mimicry? Is it the recipient or the device?
A.
A, right? The recipient, because it's the one that is receiving the action of the mimicry, the one that is receiving the actions of the recipient. You only have three terms, I think. The mimic, which is the one that does the mimicry, the recipient, which is the animal that is being fooled, this organism, and the model, right, which is whatever the first animal is copying or imitating. So option A, the recipient. Now question 3 says, why does the lecturer mention katydids? So look at your notes. It should be, because katydids is a type of animal, right? So it's gotta be in your example. It's gotta be in the example of one type of mimicry. Remember, we have 4 types, right? We had camouflage, we had Bayesian mimicry, Mullerian mimicry, and aggressive mimicry. So were katydids an example of which type? Where do you have katydids in your notes? Is it an example of the first, of camouflage? Is it an example of the second, or the third, or fourth? Which one? It has to be an example, right? So
In the letter D.
okay, yes, do you guys agree? Yes, I think I do agree. Because katydids were used as an example of the first type of mimicry, which was camouflage. And camouflage is about the animal resembling part of its environment, right? So the reason why katydids are mentioned is because they are an example of the first type of camouflage. They're an example of how an animal can resemble its environment in order to hide. So in this case, katydids look like leaves, part of its environment, and they hide very well among leaves, right? it's the only one that could actually be, if you remember, because you know that tasting bad and stinging is related to another type, not camouflage. I think that's related to Mullerian mimicry, right? Where you have animals that look like other animals that are dangerous, right? So they look like animals that are dangerous or that taste bad or that can sting, so that the other animals, the predators, don't come for them, right? But that's not the first type. That's not camouflage. That's something else. And they resemble bumblebees. No, that was mentioned later in the lecture when they were talking about Batesian mimicry, I think, when they present themselves as a united front. So in this case, it's gotta be D. And also just by thinking of the order in which things are mentioned, right? If you know the order in which the types of mimicry were mentioned, then you know that the first one was camouflage. So you know that this is probably going to be a question about camouflage. So it's got to be option D, right? And also, if you know the animal, I don't know if you guys know what a katydid is, but if you know the animal, it's like a grasshopper, right? Como un saltamontes. So you know that katydids look like leaves. So it's just common sense as well if you know the animal. Okay, now question 4. Alexandra, could you please read question 4?
Yes. Some moths and butterflies have large, all-like egg spots concealed under wings, which they can suddenly displace to a predator. Which kind of mimicry is this an example of? Batesian mimicry, camouflage, Mullerian mimicry, or aggressive mimicry?
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. So, butterflies. When do they mention butterflies? Was it an example of which type of mimicry?
D.
Yeah, aggressive mimicry, okay. Do you guys agree? Is it D? Is it aggressive mimicry? Aggressive mimicry was about an animal using mimicry to catch their prey, right? It was the only one where animals didn't use this behavior in order to protect themselves from predators, but instead they were the predators in aggressive mimicry. The mimics are the predators. So I don't know, because butterflies are not predators, right? Butterflies are trying to escape, I think, because they want to display these spots that they have to a predator. So that means that butterflies and moths are not the predators in this case. So I don't know if it can actually be an example of aggressive mimicry. Because if you guys remember, aggressive mimicry, I don't know if we can see the transcript. But aggressive mimicry was mentioned as last, right? And it's like, there's also another aspect of mimicry that I'd like to mention, and that's the mimicry used by predators. That is called aggressive mimicry, the mimicry used by predators. And it is used to conceal or misrepresent a predator until its prey comes near enough to capture. So predators use this technique to capture their prey. But in this case, the butterflies and the moths are trying to escape from a predator. So I don't know if it can be aggressive mimicry. It has to be one of the other ones. If we just answer this by if we guess, then option B, I think also is not very likely to be the one because we've already had a question about camouflage, right? So to be honest, I think it should be between A and C. What do you guys think? A or C? Let's see.
Can be letter C.
Okay, we're gonna see. Let's just choose letter C and we will see later. And finally, we have question, well, not finally. Question 5 says, which organism is presented as an example of Mullerian mimicry?
I think that is monarch butterfly, the letter C.
Okay, to be honest, you remember that you guys cannot go back, right? In these questions, you answer one question, you click next, and you cannot go back and change your answer from the previous question in the listening section. So, but what I'm seeing right now and what I'm thinking is if we selected, I mean, if this question is about Mullerian mimicry, I don't think that this question was about the same. So now I'm thinking, and I think that this should be an example of Bayesian mimicry, but we cannot change your answer, right? But just from that, because you don't usually have two questions about the same. So in this case, Mullerian mimicry is not the butterfly because the butterfly is an example of Bayesian mimicry. So I would discard also options A and C. I remember that the leaf-tailed gecko was an example of camouflage. So I would maybe choose B because butterflies were an example of the previous one. So I don't know, but we're gonna see. We're gonna see when we check our answers. And finally, question 6 that says, which would be the best title for this lecture? So remember, this was about animal mimicry, right? So what would be a synonym or the closest to that? What do you guys think? So maybe animal deception, right? Because if we analyze what this is about, deception basically means fooling, right? Deception is like engañar, engaños. So that is what this is about, right? But how animals fool other animals in order to like escape them or in order to capture them, but they end up fooling other animals, right? So I think it's gonna be C in this case. Now let's check for our previous answers. The first one was good. It's used to explain mimicry. The second one was also good. It's the recipient. Now, katydids were mentioned because they look like this. Perfect. It's an example of camouflage. Now, in this case, this is exactly what I was telling you, right? And honestly, I didn't know until I read the next one, right? But yes, moths and butterflies are an example of Bayesian mimicry. And then Mullerian mimicry is the one where animals present a united front, right? So it's like bumblebees that, that look like flies and they are all together. No, it's like flies look like bumblebees, right? And they all present a united front against their predators. And then in that case, the orchid mantis was an example of Mullerian mimicry. As I was telling you, if the butterfly is an example for this, for Bayesian, then we cannot have butterfly here, right? So it has to be the orchid mantis. And animal deception will be a title for this lecture. So what do you guys think now? Do you have any questions before we go? No questions? Okay, guys, then please don't forget today's survey, and I'll be seeing you all next week. Have a great weekend.
Bye, Andrea. Thank you.
You have a good night.
Thank you, you too.